Hello again. I mentioned yesterday how odd it is that when it comes to ethnic minorities, we are only supposed to express interest in the history of black people in Britain in past centuries, their struggles against racism and their supposed achievements against almost insurmountable odds. No other group really gets a look in. Mary Seacole is one such person whose name is on everybody's lips during October when we celebrate Black History Month in Britain. Mary Seacole was a mixed-race woman from Jamaica who ran a hotel in what is now Ukraine during a war in that country in the 1850s. She is often said to be a nurse and to have treated ill people with Caribbean folk remedies. I've talked about all this before. She has come to symbolise for many a successful and adventurous black person in Victorian Britain, overcoming racial prejudice to make a real difference in the field of medicine. Before talking about a woman belonging to a visible minority who worked as a genuine doctor in Britain in 1890, I thought I would mention that Mary Seacole does say some very unacceptable and racist things in her writings. In the description to this video, I give a link to her autobiography, which can be read online. Just click on the link and then go to page 69. Seacole didn't regard herself as black and often said some awful things about black people. Here is a passage describing her time in Central America. Our fare was of the simplest at Escribanos. It consisted mainly of salt meat, rice and roasted Indian corn. The native fare was not tempting and some of their delicacies were absolutely disgusting. With what pleasure, for instance, could one foreign to their tastes and habits dine off a roasted monkey whose grilled head bore a strong resemblance to a Negro baby's? She thinks that the head of a monkey looks like that of a black baby. Does anybody else find this a little shocking? Imagine if this was to be found in a book written by a white person in the 19th century. It would be evidence of racism. Mary Seacole scatters the so-called Nword about as well in the most casual way. Here she is talking about food again. And as the evening wore on, the shouting and quarrelling at the doorway in Yankee twang increased momentarily, while some seated themselves at the table and, hammering upon it with the handles of their knives, hallooed out to the excited Nword cooks to make haste. Again, we observe that if a white writer of the time was seen today to be writing in that vein, then his or her books would be treated as being contaminated by racism. Because nobody ever bothers actually to take the trouble to find out about Seacole, though, nobody knows about all this. Mary Seacole is often brandished as a West Indian counterpart to Florence Nightingale, somebody involved with medicine in the Victorian period who was not white and is therefore worth celebrating. What about a real female doctor, though, who belonged to a visible minority and actually worked in a hospital, a British hospital, during the 19th century? I draw your attention to a woman called Annie Wardlaw Jagannathan, who was born in 1864 in the Indian city of Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh. She studied medicine first at Madras University and then came to Edinburgh to train as a doctor, qualifying there in 1890. She was house surgeon at the Edinburgh Hospital for Women and Children. Her brother also qualified as a doctor, as too did her niece. This is a fascinating story because there's no evidence that she encountered any prejudice for being Indian, although women were certainly looked askance at that time in medicine, so any prejudice she did encounter was more on the grounds that she was a woman rather than that she belonged to a visible minority. This is the sort of story which we never hear from those who are determined to pretend that racial prejudice prevented black people getting on in this country. Most viewers have heard of Mary Seacole. Did anybody at all watching this know that an Indian woman had qualified in this country and practiced medicine here in the same century? This is the problem when all the focus of discussion about ethnic minorities is around people of African heritage? Here is a question for viewers. We have heard an awful lot about Mary Seacole, and she's something of an icon for black people who wish to believe that somebody from the West Indies achieved something worthwhile in the mid-19th century. You have, however, never heard of an Indian person in Britain boasting about Annie Wardlaw Jagannathan in the same way, even though she accomplished a great deal more in the medical line than Mary Seacole. Why is that, do you think? Although they have many success stories from Britain during Queen Victoria's reign, Indians don't bang on about them or demand that this should be taught in schools in this country. Even though there are more people in this country whose origins are the Indian subcontinent than there are those from Africa and the Caribbean, you will not hear any calls for Asian History Month or for Asian history to be taught in schools. What do you think is going on here?